Okay, so I recorded this video like twice, and I didn't like it. This one's going to be about two-weapon fighting, mostly in D&D, but I'll use some other examples. Because I personally kind of feel like almost no game really gets dual wielding or two-weapon fighting or power stancing, whatever term you want to use. I kind of feel like no game really gets it right. So, real quick, I'm going to go over two-weapon fighting in 5e, and also how it's changing in the new books, because it's sort of changing a little bit. Not in the way I feel like it should. And then there's also with feeds, without feeds. So basically, the way two-weapon fighting works is if you're holding two weapons and you make an attack with one as an action on your turn, you can make a bonus action with a different weapon in your other hand. You attack as normal, but you don't add your ability mod to the damage of that weapon strike. Then there's two ways you can improve that in the basic rules. You can get the two-weapon fighting style, which just lets you add your ability mod to damage, which is literally just making it usable, like, basically. Because, like, at level 1, before level 5, we'll say, in tier 1, without the fighting style, using like 2 short swords or 2 scimitars does the same damage as a greatsword, because the greatsword does 2d6 plus your ability mod, and the two-weapon fighting does a d6 plus your weapon plus your ability mod and another d6. So it's the same damage. Not great. I don't like it. So just needing the weapon style to make it just anything, differentiated in any way, is kind of lame. Like, all the other fighting styles mostly add something, except for great weapon fighting, but that's a whole other thing. But let's see, anybody coming that way? Coming this way. So needing the fighting style to just become basically worth it in any capacity, I think is dumb. So I would have, but we'll get to that. And then the other way to kind of improve it is the dual wielder feat, which is very lame. You get +1 AC, you can draw 2 weapons at once, which is also another problem with the system. Because the game only lets you do 1 weapon interaction, but if that's also the type of thing that tends to get hand waved as well, because if you're really going along with each rule like that, everybody's going to spend their first turn putting on their shield and taking out a sword. That's everybody's first turn. And that's kind of an issue with 5e's, not their natural language, but kind of how they're trying to make everything realistic. Tons of things in the 2014 rulebook take an action to do, because oh yeah, that would probably take your whole action to do that, but it's not a powerful enough effect to warrant a player using their entire turn. Because also a player wants to do their stuff. They don't want to spend an action getting ready to do something next turn. But again, not. So in the new, before I move on to the new books, there are other ways two-weapon fighting can be, quote, good. Anything, if you have ways to add extra flat damage or extra die, just kind of any damage to a hit. If you can cast Hex or Hunter's Mark, or if you're a level 11 Paladin and you've got improved Divine Smite. those are arguments for using 2-weapon fighting, because the more attacks you get, the more times you get to add this extra damage. But also, per the math, especially for something like Hunter's Mark, well, specifically for Crossbow Expert, which is similar to 2-weapon fighting but better in like every way, because it's just all you need is a feat, and you don't need to use both hands, you don't need a fighting style for it, and blah blah blah. Usually casting Hunter's Mark isn't going to be worth it unless like you know this combat is going to be, or rather unless you know that enemy is going to be alive for like at least 3 rounds. Because if you're only making like Hunter's Mark this turn, main attack, then next turn you're making main attacks and offhand attacks, then like mathematically it's not as worth it if you're adding ability mod to damage that. But that's a caveat. There's ways to like synchronize or synergize with it. But the way they're changing it in the 2024 books is they're sort of not. They're at it, but they are adding, there's 2 things. One, well, first, the 2-weapon fighting style isn't changing, which I really think it should. But what they're adding is a weapon mastery, which is, you know, their whole weapon mastery system. Each weapon gets a particular extra feature that you can choose to unlock. It's like weapon specializations, basically. Like all the martial classes get, like, they can choose... They can choose, like, I think 2 or a few weapons, depending on their class, to, like, gain the masteries of. And one of the masteries is called Nick. And I believe the daggers and scimitars get it. So what that lets you do is, instead of doing that offhand attack as a bonus action, you can just do it as part of your action. This is what I feel the 2-weapon fighting style should do. It's like, and using 2-weapon fighting, as long as you're proficient with the weapons, you should just add your ability mod to the damage. That should not be a caveat. Like, yeah, theoretically, okay, a cleric might be able to use 2-weapon fighting and get double their attacks, but they're still missing out on a shield. Like, come on. Like, and none of their other feature, like Divine Strike, doesn't add to that. So there's not, I don't see a lot of characters like just picking this up because they can add their ability mod to the damage without 2-weapon fighting, or without the fighting style. It also hampers classes like the Barbarian a lot more, because the Barbarian gets to add flat damage from their rage. So getting an extra attack should feel cool. That should be good, right? No, it's because they don't have access to fighting styles for some reason, which is another thing I always kind of felt like they should get, or that Barbarians should get, but anyway. So the Nick property lets you make your offhand attack as part of your action, which is good. And then they also changed the dual wielder feat, so that when you use it, it's like, it's super weird, and there's a lot of conversation around it. Theoretically, it lets you make an additional attack. Like, I'm not going to go into specifics, but the way it's worded, like, if you have a weapon with the Nick property, the dual wielder feat also still lets you make an attack as a bonus action with a weapon in your offhand. So it's goofy, but it theoretically lets you get a 4th attack for most classes, fighters notwithstanding. That would be really good, and that's also one of the ways I would change it. So with the way here's basically how I would change it. I've been thinking about this a long time. The simple way to change it is, 1, you always get your ability mod to the damage. Yeah, it's more damage at lower levels, and maybe in tier 1 a lot more characters would use it, but you know, you're still missing out on the shield, you're missing out on a lot of things. Like 2-weapon fighting clerics, they're not going to be able to do their job as well. Like, yeah, they'll get an extra attack, but they're not going to be able to cast spells as well. They're not going to be able to do a lot of things as well, and they're missing out on a shield. So you get your ability mod to the damage as a baseline. The 2-weapon fighting style lets you make your offhand attack as part of your action instead of as a bonus action. And then the dual wielder feat, does some other things, but its main draw is you can make a second attack with it. Maybe restrict this feat to level 8 or higher, or above level 5, we'll say. So, but that's it. Because that way, 2-weapon fighting stays mostly like 50% over kind of baseline. It stays competitive with other weapons using feats like the new Great Weapon Fighting or Great Weapon Master. You can add your proficiency bonus to the damage of your 2-handed weapon. That mostly keeps it pretty. That keeps a big 2-hander pretty competitive. 2-weapon fighting is still going to do the most damage, but it's also the most restrictive because it uses both your hands. And if you're at a table that uses somatic components, that's a problem. Now, if you're like a ranger or a paladin and you want to cast spells, you have to take the warcaster feat. That's not something our table worries about, but that is a factor. Maybe you need enough dex to do it. There's a lot of ways to think about it. But that mostly keeps the damage in line. Where it starts to get away from you, theoretically, is fighters. Because when fighters start to get their 3rd attack and their 4th attack, then it could get away from you. That's why just make the offhand max 2 attacks. You have to get a feat to get the 2nd attack. Done. Easy, it's simple, it makes sense. There isn't all that confusing fucking wording with the 2024 dual wielder feat. Maybe in some cases the math will get weird, but oh no. And also, theoretically, you're still restricted to light weapons. I think you should stay mostly restricted to light weapons. Maybe you can get some other feats in there, but that's still feat taxes. Our table has a feat. I've never seen it used. Somebody used it in one of the other games I'm not a part of at the table. But there's a homebrew feat that lets you use 2-handed weapons as part of dual wielding, and that's probably pretty strong. But that doesn't throw off the math that much. It's okay, you're doing 2d6 instead of 1d6. That's still a lot of extra dice if you're a fighter at level 11 making 3 main hand attacks and 2 offhand attacks. But these are still a lot of feats you got to get. I don't know, you still got to use your fighting style to get it. You got to get these feats to get it. So I think that's how I personally would fix it in 5e. There's other ways it could be done, and I've seen a few other ways to do it, but that's just how I would do it. Then, I guess I'm not going to go too far into other weapons, or not other weapons, the way other games do it, in say Elden Ring, a video game. Because I'm not as well versed in other TTRPGs, and we're starting to get into other games, or getting ready to get into other games. But I'm busy. I don't have a whole lot of time to study other systems. That's one of the reasons I record videos while I'm driving, because driving is effectively downtime for me, and it's the only real downtime I get. So, a game like Elden Ring, it does have dual wielding, and it does it in 2 ways. One, there's paired weapons, which is a weapon where, effectively when you equip it, you just get 2 of them. When you go to 2-hand the weapon, you pull out a second one. This, I think, is my preferred system in Elden Ring, because one, it allows you to buff both weapons at the same time without weirdly juggling them and doing all sorts of other nonsense. Or you can do what's called powerstancing, which is just you equip 2 different weapons of the same type in each hand, and you get effectively the same thing. But it also interacts with your like attack buttons weirdly, because if you're using paired weapons, your main attack, your R1 attack, becomes, you attack with both, and sometimes your heavy attack uses both, depending on the weapon. It's not always true. Then you can still like block, which you're usually not going to do, and you get your weapon skill. That's not different. But when power stancing, you still get your one-handed light attack chain, your heavy attack isn't different, and then your block button becomes use both weapons, which I always kind of felt is goofy and a waste of controller space. But that's a different argument for a different kind of game and a different kind of game design. But yeah, like, I could talk about dual wielding for a while in other games and stuff, but that's kind of it. That's all I really got for you today.